When I came home from work that evening, my wife greeted me at the door with an unusual excitement in her eyes. Usually, when she had some grand plan or idea, it came up at the last minute. A quick "get ready, we're heading out" was her usual style. But this time, she seemed different. Before I even had the chance to set my briefcase down, she blurted out, "You're not going to believe what I came across today." Her energy was undeniable, and although I'm not one for surprises, I decided to hear her out. She started talking about this dog exhibition she had seen online. Apparently, it was an open event where anyone could come, walk the dogs, and spend some time with them. I immediately saw where this was heading. She'd been talking about getting a dog for years, and I had managed to hold the line. A dog meant responsibility, work, and disruptions to our neat and orderly home. But there she was, describing this event with the kind of enthusiasm that was hard to ignore. She even added, "And you know what? It's perfect timing because my friend's coming over later tonight with her dog. I'll talk to her about it then." Her friend arrived that evening, her small dog trotting in like it owned the place. They'd always been close, and her friend's opinions carried weight. Naturally, she loved the idea of the exhibition. "It's a great way to meet new people," she said, "and you'll get to see how you feel walking a dog. Oh, and by the way, one of my friends met her boyfriend at one of these events." I raised an eyebrow at that. Met her boyfriend? Or a dog? My question was innocent enough, but the way my wife glanced at me, a mix of amusement and exasperation, made it clear she thought I was missing the point. Her friend laughed and went on about how events like this could be transformative. I couldn't help but think it sounded like a lot of fluff, but I kept my opinions to myself. By the time the conversation shifted back to logistics, they were practically planning the whole weekend around this. My wife's friend was all in, talking about how she'd join us, and it'd be a fun group outing. The enthusiasm was contagious, at least for them. For me, I just nodded along, keeping my thoughts on how much time this would take. I wasn't against dogs, I liked them well enough, but I wasn't thrilled about the sudden shift in plans. My wife, of course, started listing all the potential benefits of going. She was relentless when she had her mind set on something. "It'll be good for us," she said, "to get out, try something different. And who knows? Maybe you'll enjoy it too." I didn't argue. Sometimes it's easier to let her run with her plans and see where things go. Eventually, the discussion came back to me. "So? Are you in?" my wife asked, her eyes full of expectation. Her friend was looking at me too, waiting for my response. I could have protested or laid out my reasons why this might not be the best use of our time. But the truth was, it didn't seem worth the fight. "All right," I said, "if this is what you want, let's do it." That was all the encouragement they needed. Plans were made, times were set, and everyone seemed satisfied. We agreed to head to the exhibition that weekend, all three of us. As for me, I resolved to keep an open mind. It wasn't my first choice of how to spend a Saturday, but sometimes, you go along for the ride. The weekend came, and as planned, we got ready and headed out to pick up my wife's friend. She was waiting at her place, dog in tow, looking just as excited as my wife. The atmosphere in the car was light, filled with chatter about how much fun this would be. I focused on driving, keeping my thoughts about how much I disliked these sudden outings to myself. The two women talked non-stop, trading stories about dogs they had seen online and laughing about the antics of her friend's little terrier. I just nodded along where appropriate, staying in my lane, literally and figuratively. When we arrived at the park, it was packed with people and dogs of all sizes. It was chaos, to say the least. Dogs were running around, barking, and their owners were either chatting or chasing after them. My wife and her friend were thrilled. They quickly went to the registration booth and came back with a leash and a small dog. "Look at her! Isn't she adorable?" my wife exclaimed. I nodded, though I didn't really see the big deal. To me, it was just another dog, but they were both over the moon. We started walking through the park, the small dog trotting happily in front of us. The women chatted away, occasionally stopping to pet other dogs or talk to their owners. I kept my distance, watching and keeping an eye on our surroundings. It wasn't my scene, but I had to admit it was interesting to see so many different types of dogs in one place. As we moved along, I noticed how easily my wife got caught up in conversations. She'd talk to anyone with a dog, asking about breeds, behavior, and training tips. I stayed quiet, content to let her enjoy herself. At one point, the dog we were walking suddenly bolted, pulling the leash out of my wife's hand. It darted across a picnic blanket where a young man was sitting, knocking over his coffee in the process. The cup tumbled, spilling its contents all over his lap. My wife gasped and ran over, apologizing profusely. The man waved it off, smiling. "It's fine," he said, "it's just coffee. Besides, it's not your fault, it's the dog's." His relaxed demeanor diffused the situation quickly. Her friend, ever the extrovert, jumped into the conversation. "Why are you here alone?" she asked. The man explained that his friend had planned to come but cancelled at the last minute due to being sick. "So here I am," he said, "just me and the dogs." My wife and her friend, in unison, invited him to join us. I sighed internally, thinking this was the last thing we needed. But there he was, now walking alongside us as if he'd been part of the group all along. As we walked, the conversation naturally turned to him. He introduced himself as a veterinarian who ran his own clinic from home. He specialized in helping animals that had been injured or needed surgery. My wife and her friend were fascinated, peppering him with questions about his work. He handed my wife a business card, mentioning that his clinic was nearby. I stayed quiet, observing him. There was something about the way he looked at my wife and her friend that I didn't like. It wasn't anything overt, but it was enough to put me on edge. The conversation eventually shifted back to dogs. My wife started talking about how much she'd love to have one of her own. "This is fun," she said, "but it's not the same as having a dog at home." The veterinarian chimed in, "Then get one. You'd be a great dog owner." His encouragement seemed to plant a seed in her mind. She turned to me, her eyes searching for approval. I simply nodded, not wanting to make a scene in front of everyone. We wrapped up the day with a coffee stop, sitting at one of the outdoor tables near the park. The conversation continued, with my wife and her friend sharing their dreams of dog ownership while the veterinarian added his professional insights. I mostly listened, contributing only when directly asked. Eventually, the time came to leave. We all said our goodbyes, and I nodded again when my wife looked at me, signaling that we were ready to go. As we got into the car, I couldn't help but feel relieved that the outing was over, even as I wondered what this new fascination with dogs might lead to. When we got back home, my wife was practically glowing with excitement. "That was amazing," she said, still caught up in the buzz of the day. "I can't believe we waited so long to do something like that." I could tell she was already thinking about the next step. It wasn't hard to guess, she wanted a dog, and she wanted one now. I tried to keep her grounded. "You realize having a dog isn't just a walk in the park," I said. "It's a lot of work. Feeding, walking, training, it's not all fun and games." She waved me off, clearly undeterred. I decided to bring up something that had been bugging me since the park. "By the way, did you notice how that guy kept looking at you and your friend? He wasn't just being friendly, he was practically drooling." She rolled her eyes and laughed. "You're imagining things," she said. "He's a vet. He probably just likes talking about dogs." I wasn't convinced, but I let it slide. There wasn't much point in pushing it further when she was in such a good mood. The conversation shifted quickly. She was already scrolling through her phone, looking up breeders and adoption options. "Look at this," she said, showing me pictures of puppies. I've got to admit, they were cute. But cute didn't outweigh practical. Still, by the end of the evening, she had found a breeder nearby with a litter of Dobermans ready for adoption. "They're strong, loyal, and intelligent," she said, reading from the ad. "Perfect for us." I raised an eyebrow. For you, maybe, I said. Let's see how this plays out. The next day, we drove out to the breeder's place. It was a well-maintained property with large open spaces for the dogs to roam. My wife was practically bouncing with excitement as we walked up to meet the puppies. The breeder introduced us to a sleek, black and tan Doberman. He was a big pup, already showing signs of the size and strength he'd grow into. My wife fell in love instantly. She crouched down to pet him, and he wagged his tail furiously, licking her hand. I could tell the decision was already made. By the time we left, we had everything: the dog, a leash, a crate, and a long list of care instructions. Bringing him home felt like bringing a tornado into the house. The dog had endless energy, sniffing and exploring every corner. My wife couldn't take her eyes off him. She followed him around, making sure he was comfortable and had everything he needed. It was clear she was smitten. I, on the other hand, was still trying to wrap my head around how quickly this had all happened. Over the next few days, my wife's attachment to the dog only grew stronger. She spent every free moment with him, even letting him sleep on the bed. "He's part of the family now," she said, as if that explained everything. I wasn't exactly thrilled about sharing the bed, but I let it go. Her happiness was obvious, and I had to admit, the dog was starting to grow on me too. Even though I'd always been more of a cat person, there was something about the Doberman's loyalty and energy that I couldn't ignore. One evening, I walked into the living room and found her on the phone. She was speaking in hushed tones, her back turned to me. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. She turned around, startled. "It's the vet," she said casually. I had a few questions about the dog's diet and care. I frowned. "Isn't that what the internet is for?" She brushed off my comment, saying, "He's an experienced professional. It's better to get advice from someone who knows what they're talking about." I didn't argue further, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. Something about the situation didn't sit right with me. Still, I told myself to let it go for now. She seemed happy, and the dog was settling in well. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. Either way, I decided to keep an eye on things, just in case. After a few weeks, we started to notice that something was off with our Doberman. He wasn't his usual energetic self, and it became clear that he wasn't feeling well. Normally, he would be bouncing around the house, full of life, but now he spent most of his time lying down, barely moving. When he started vomiting one evening, my wife and I both knew it was time to take action. "We need to get him to a vet," I said immediately, already thinking of a reputable clinic I knew. But before I could finish explaining, my wife cut me off. "We're taking him to the vet we met at the park," she said firmly. Her tone left no room for discussion. "He said Dobermans can have congenital issues, and he's closer. It just makes sense." I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I decided not to argue. The priority was getting the dog help as quickly as possible. Still, it annoyed me that she dismissed my suggestion so quickly without even considering it. We loaded the dog into the car and drove to the vet's clinic. When we arrived, the vet greeted us warmly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was a little too comfortable around my wife. He examined the dog thoroughly, explaining that Dobermans are prone to certain hereditary conditions. After running some tests, he told us it would be best to leave the dog at his clinic for a few days. "It'll be easier to monitor him and ensure he gets the care he needs," he said. I wasn't convinced. "Is that really necessary?" I asked. "We can take him home, and you could stop by to check on him if needed. He'd be more comfortable in his own space." Before the vet could respond, my wife interrupted again. "If he says it's better for the dog to stay here, then that's what we'll do," she said sharply. Her tone made it clear that the discussion was over. I bit my tongue, deciding to let it go for now, but it didn't sit well with me. We left the clinic with our dog in the vet's care, and the car ride home was anything but pleasant. The tension between us was palpable. Finally, I broke the silence. "You're too quick to take everything he says at face value," I said. "You don't even question it." It's like you're blindly following him." My wife's response was immediate and heated. "What are you talking about? He's a professional. He knows what he's doing. Why do you always have to question everything?" The argument escalated from there. She accused me of being difficult and unsupportive, while I pointed out that she was putting too much trust in someone we barely knew. "It's not about not trusting him," I said. "It's about making sure we're doing what's best for our dog. Blind trust isn't always the answer." She rolled her eyes and turned away, clearly done with the conversation. By the time we got home, the silence between us was deafening. I could see that she was upset, but I didn't know how to fix it. She believed wholeheartedly that she was doing the right thing, and any criticism I offered only made her more defensive. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the situation wasn't right. Over the next couple of days, the tension lingered. She made a point of avoiding any discussion about the vet or the dog's stay at the clinic. When I tried to bring it up, she shut me down immediately. It was clear she felt attacked, and no matter what I said, she took it as a personal insult. I decided to give her some space, hoping things would calm down on their own. While our Doberman was staying at the clinic, my wife made a point of visiting him every day after work. At first, I thought it was sweet, a testament to how much she cared for the dog. She'd come home and tell me about how he was doing, how he wagged his tail when he saw her, and how the vet was optimistic about his recovery. I didn't think much of it at the time, it all seemed normal, even admirable. But as the days went on, things started to shift. Initially, her visits were brief. She'd leave right after work, spend a little time at the clinic, and come home in time for dinner. But then she started coming home later and later. When I asked why, her explanations became increasingly vague. I was helping the vet, she'd say. There was a dog that needed a catheter, and he asked if I could assist. Another time, it was a sick cat that needed an IV. At first, I brushed it off, thinking she was just being helpful. But the pattern continued, and her excuses started to feel more like stories than genuine reasons. One evening, she came home even later than usual. When I asked what had kept her, she sighed and said, "I was just helping out with the animals. The vet was short-staffed, and I couldn't just leave." That's when I finally said something. "Since when are you a volunteer?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. It's one thing to visit our dog, but this is getting out of hand. She immediately bristled, turning defensive. "What's your problem?" she snapped. "I'm just trying to help." "Why are you making this a big deal?" I didn't back down. "It's not about helping," I said. "It's about priorities. Our dog is the reason you're there, not every other animal in the clinic. If it's that important, let me go visit him instead." That's when she exploded. "You're being ridiculous," she shouted. "You're acting like an abuser, trying to control everything I do." With that, she stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. I was left standing in the kitchen, stunned by her reaction. The tension lingered for days. She avoided talking to me about the clinic or her visits, and I didn't press her further. I decided it wasn't worth the fight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her behavior was too unusual to ignore completely. Still, I resolved to let it go until our dog was back home. At least then, I hoped, things would return to normal. Finally, the day came when we could bring the dog home. The vet assured us that he was recovering well and just needed some rest and care at home. Picking him up felt like a relief, a return to normalcy after weeks of uncertainty. My wife was ecstatic, showering the dog with affection as soon as we got him into the car. For a moment, everything felt right again. The tension between us seemed to melt away, at least temporarily. Back at home, the dog settled in quickly, happy to be back in familiar surroundings. My wife's attention was entirely on him, which suited me just fine. I hoped that with the dog's return, her visits to the clinic would naturally come to an end. But I was wrong. Even with the dog at home, she started finding reasons to go back. "The vet needs help," she'd say. "They're so short-staffed, and I've already been helping with so much." It'd feel wrong to just stop now. After weeks of tension and suspicion, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My wife's behavior had changed too much to ignore. The late nights, the vague explanations, the defensive outbursts, it all pointed to something she wasn't telling me. I decided it was time to get answers, and the only way I could think to do that was by checking her phone. I knew it wasn't the most honorable approach, but I needed clarity. I waited until she went to bed, pretending to be engrossed in a book until I was sure she was asleep. Once I was confident she was out, I reached for her phone. But when I pressed the screen to unlock it, I was met with a passcode. That was new. She'd never used a password before, and it immediately raised red flags. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What could the code be? I tried a few obvious guesses, our anniversary, her birthday, but nothing worked. Frustrated, I set the phone back down, realizing I'd need to find another way to figure it out. The next day, I had the house to myself while my wife was at work. I decided to take advantage of the opportunity to search for clues. I started in her office, going through drawers, bookshelves, and anywhere else she might keep something important. After some time, I stumbled upon an old notebook tucked away in the back of a drawer. Flipping through it, I saw pages filled with notes and doodles, some of which looked recent. I studied the entries, hoping to find something that might hint at her phone's password. Despite my effort, none of the numbers or phrases in the notebook worked. Frustrated but not ready to give up, I returned the notebook to its place and kept searching. I moved on to her nightstand, her closet, even the kitchen, but I found nothing that helped. It was starting to feel like a dead end. Part of me wanted to confront her directly, but I knew that would only escalate the situation without giving me any real answers. I needed to be patient and methodical. Later that evening, I noticed her smartwatch lying on the counter. It struck me as an opportunity. If her watch was synced to her phone, it might give me access to the information I needed. I picked it up, swiping through the screens to see if it was locked. To my relief, it wasn't. But I quickly realized it would be too risky to browse through it while she was around. If she caught me, it would lead to a confrontation I wasn't ready for. I came up with a plan. I'd wait for the right moment to temporarily disable the watch. That opportunity came when she went to take a shower. As soon as the water started running, I picked up the watch and lightly bumped it against the corner of the counter, causing the screen to crack slightly. It wasn't a major break, just enough to make it seem like an accident. I set it back down and waited. When she came out of the bathroom, I pointed to the watch and said, "The dog knocked it off the counter. I'm sorry, but it looks like it's broken." She picked it up, inspecting the damage. "Oh, seriously?" she said, clearly annoyed but not overly suspicious. "Don't worry," I added quickly. "I'll take care of it. I'll fix it myself." She seemed satisfied with that and didn't press the issue further. With the watch now in my possession, I had the chance to dig deeper without the risk of immediate detection. It wasn't ideal, and I knew it wouldn't solve all the mysteries, but it was a step forward. For now, I told myself, this would have to do. At least I had bought myself some time to figure out what was really going on. I decided to take the damaged smartwatch to a friend of mine who was good with electronics. I knew he'd be able to fix it quickly and discreetly. On my way there, I tried to keep my mind focused, but the unease in my gut only grew. I hadn't yet found concrete proof of anything, but the secrecy and shifts in behavior from my wife were enough to keep me on edge. When I arrived, my friend took one look at the watch and assured me it wouldn't take long to repair. I left it in his capable hands, thanking him for his help. With the watch temporarily out of the equation, I decided to visit my closest friend. He's the kind of guy who's seen me through thick and thin, and I needed his perspective. When I explained the situation to him, laying out the odd behavior and the tension at home, he listened carefully. "This doesn't sound normal," he said after I finished. "If you're this unsettled, you need to figure out exactly what's going on." By the time I got the watch back from my electronics-savvy friend, I had made up my mind. I synced it to a spare device so I could view its contents without alerting my wife. As soon as I opened the messaging app, my stomach dropped. There was an ongoing thread with the veterinarian. The casual familiarity of their conversation immediately struck me. I started scrolling, reading each message carefully, and the further I went, the worse it got. One message from him read, "Will you be coming by today?" She had replied with a simple yes. Then there was another text, "How is the new command working with the dog?" Her response sent a chill down my spine, perfectly. It's like it's replaced my husband in every way. I had to reread the lines several times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My hands clenched as I forced myself to keep scrolling. The conversation took an even darker turn. She mentioned wanting something more, something that made my stomach churn. "You wouldn't believe it," she wrote. "I've been thinking about having kids with the dog." I could hardly process what I was reading, and the bile rose in my throat. The vet responded with an invitation, "Come over, and I'll show you how it's done. We can practice one of the most important commands together." My grip on the device tightened as I tried to keep my composure. I showed the messages to my friend, who had been sitting quietly as I scrolled. He read them carefully, his expression hardening with each line. When he was done, he looked at me and said, "She's lost it. You need to get out of this marriage, and fast. This is beyond anything I've ever heard of." Despite my shock, I forced myself to think logically. "I need proof," I said. "If this goes to court, I need something solid to protect myself." My friend nodded in agreement. "You're right. You'll need evidence, not just for her, but for this vet too. He's clearly involved in something deeply wrong." I spent the next few minutes downloading the entire chat thread to my phone, making sure I had copies of every message. It wasn't an easy process, reading through the vile exchanges, but it had to be done. When I was finished, I felt a grim sense of resolution. I didn't know exactly how I would handle this yet, but I had the proof I needed to take the next steps. The first thing I decided to do was focus on the veterinarian. The messages between him and my wife were enough to make my blood boil, but I needed more concrete evidence if I was going to take this further. I remembered that when we had visited his clinic, I'd noticed several cameras both inside and outside the property. It struck me then that these cameras could be recording everything or even streaming in real time. If that was the case, there might be a way to access those recordings and see what was truly going on. I went back through the messages on my phone, looking for anything that might help. Sure enough, one of their chats mentioned the clinic's Wi-Fi password. I noted it down, along with anything else that seemed relevant. I've worked with surveillance systems before, installing cameras and setting up networks, so I knew my way around this kind of technology. It didn't take long for me to identify the camera system he was likely using, based on the equipment I'd seen during our visit. With a clear plan in mind, I did some reconnaissance. I drove past the clinic a few times to get a sense of its layout and the range of the Wi-Fi signal. I parked at a safe distance and ran a few tests to confirm I could connect to the network. Once I was confident I had everything I needed, I headed back home to wait for the right moment to act. Timing was crucial, and I couldn't afford to be careless. The opportunity came soon enough. My wife announced that she was heading out to volunteer again. I told her I needed to take the car to the mechanic and might be home late. She didn't ask too many questions, which was a relief. After she left, I followed her at a safe distance, making sure not to draw any attention. Once she arrived at the clinic and went inside, I parked nearby and connected to the Wi-Fi network. It was time to put my plan into action. Accessing the camera system wasn't difficult. The network was poorly secured, and I quickly gained entry. As I browsed through the live feeds, my worst fears were confirmed. There she was, sitting with the veterinarian, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I recorded everything, making sure to capture every interaction. Then, as if that wasn't enough, the conversation shifted to a topic that made my stomach churn, the so-called secret command. She mentioned trying it out soon, adding that I wouldn't be home to interfere. I kept recording, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and disgust. After 15 minutes, she sheeped on me with this guy. After she left the clinic, I stayed behind, watching the live feeds for a little longer. What I saw next was even more damning. The veterinarian's demeanor changed completely once he was alone. He began yelling at the animals in their cages, swearing loudly and slamming his fists on the counters. At one point, he even struck one of the cages, causing the animal inside to cower in fear. It was clear this man had no business working with animals. I made sure to capture every second of his outburst. This footage was more than just leverage against him, it was evidence that could potentially shut down his entire operation. By the time I disconnected from the system and drove away, I had hours of incriminating material saved on my phone. It wasn't just about his involvement with my wife anymore, it was about stopping someone who was clearly a danger to the animals in his care. When I got home, I began reviewing the footage carefully, organizing it into sections and making backups. I wasn't sure yet how I'd use it, but I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't going to let him get away with this. This wasn't just personal anymore. I had a responsibility to make sure he faced consequences for his actions. The next steps were clear. First, I'd deal with him. Then, I'd turn my attention to my wife and figure out how to confront her about everything. After gathering the incriminating evidence against the veterinarian, I parked my car a short distance from my house and approached quietly. I didn't want my wife to know I was home yet. As I entered the house, I moved cautiously, listening for any sounds that might give me an idea of what was happening inside. The house was eerily quiet except for faint noises coming from our bedroom. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and what I saw left me frozen in place. In the bedroom, my wife was engaged in something very strange with our Doberman. I'll leave it at that, but it was enough to make my stomach turn. I reached for my phone, recording the scene without making a sound. I wanted undeniable proof of what was happening. She was so absorbed in what she was doing that she didn't even notice I was there. I backed out of the room quietly, trying to process what I had just witnessed. A little while later, I stepped back into the room, making my presence known. She jumped, startled, and immediately began crying. "It's not what you think," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Her hands were shaking, and she couldn't even look me in the eye. I stayed calm, my voice firm but controlled. "If you want to save this marriage," I said, "you're going to tell me exactly what's going on, right now." She hesitated at first, but eventually, she began to talk. Between sobs, she confessed everything. She admitted to having an affair with the veterinarian and went on to reveal something even more shocking: she had developed an obsessive desire to have children with the dog. Her words were disjointed, her reasoning incomprehensible, but there was no mistaking the seriousness of what she was saying. I stood there, stunned, barely able to process the magnitude of her admission. Despite my shock and disgust, I managed to stay composed. "All right," I said, my tone measured. "I forgive you." Her eyes widened in disbelief, but what she didn't know was that I wasn't forgiving her out of compassion. I needed time to act. I had already decided to end this marriage, but I wanted to ensure that I had all my legal and personal bases covered before making a move. Forgiving her, at least on the surface, was the quickest way to de-escalate the situation. Over the next few days, I reached out to a divorce attorney and explained the situation in detail. The attorney was as shocked as I had been but assured me that we could proceed swiftly. Together, we began drafting the divorce papers and discussing potential legal actions against the veterinarian. I also consulted with another professional about how best to handle the disturbing evidence I had collected. By the time the papers were ready, I felt prepared to take the next step. I returned home with the divorce documents in hand. When I handed them to my wife, her reaction was immediate and explosive. She screamed, tore the papers in half, and began throwing anything within reach. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked, her voice filled with rage and desperation. When I didn't react, she turned on me physically, lunging and trying to claw at me. I stepped back, keeping my distance, but it was clear she was completely unhinged. Realizing that the situation had spiraled out of control, I called for an ambulance. I told the dispatcher that my wife was having a severe mental health crisis and needed immediate assistance. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived. She continued to scream and resist as they restrained her gently but firmly. Watching her being taken away, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. It was a tragic end to an already unbearable chapter, but it was necessary. With her now under professional care, I could finally begin to move forward with my life. After my wife was taken away for psychiatric care, I wasted no time in taking control of the situation. It was clear to me that she would eventually return, and when she did, I needed to ensure my safety and peace of mind. The first thing I did was begin gathering her belongings. I went through every room in the house, meticulously searching for anything that belonged to her: clothes, shoes, personal items, and anything else she had brought into our home over the years. Each item went into black garbage bags, one after another. As I packed, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt relief, knowing that I was reclaiming my space, but another part of me couldn't believe it had come to this. Still, I reminded myself that this was necessary. There was no going back after everything that had happened. The relationship was beyond repair, and my focus now was on protecting myself and moving forward. Once her personal belongings were packed, I turned my attention to the more valuable items in the house. I knew that if she returned in a fit of rage, she might target these things. I started with the jewelry, gathering every piece she owned into a small box. Then I moved on to the electronics, laptops, tablets, and anything else she might try to destroy or take out of spite. I carefully packed all of these items and set them aside. The next step was to secure the items I had gathered. I loaded the valuables into my car and drove them to my parents' house. My parents had always been a source of support for me, and I trusted them to keep everything safe. I explained the situation to them briefly, leaving out some of the more sordid details, and they agreed to hold on to the items until the dust settled. Knowing that these things were out of the house gave me a sense of relief. When I returned home, I focused on clearing out the rest of her belongings. There were still smaller, less significant items scattered around the house: cosmetics, trinkets, and random bits of clutter. I didn't want to leave anything behind that could remind me of her or give her an excuse to return. One by one, I filled the remaining garbage bags and stacked them neatly by the door, ready to be taken out when the time came. With her belongings packed and out of the way, I turned my attention to securing the house itself. The locks on the doors were the first priority. I knew she still had a key, and the last thing I wanted was for her to let herself in unannounced. I drove to the hardware store and purchased new locks for every exterior door in the house. It was a small expense, but one that gave me immense peace of mind. Replacing the locks took longer than I expected, but it was worth the effort. As I worked, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. This was my home now, my safe space, and I was taking the necessary steps to protect it. By the time I finished, the doors were secure, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't felt in weeks. The house finally felt like mine again. Before I called it a day, I moved the garbage bags containing her belongings to the front door. I didn't want them inside any longer than necessary. I left them outside, a clear signal that her chapter in this house was over. With the locks changed and her things packed away, I finally felt like I could breathe. The house was now a place of safety and stability, free from the chaos that had consumed it for far too long. The next step in my plan was dealing with the veterinarian. After everything I had uncovered, there was no question in my mind that this man needed to face justice. I started by reaching out to a lawyer, explaining the situation in detail and providing the evidence I had gathered, including the incriminating footage from the clinic. The lawyer was shocked but assured me that there was a strong case against him. Together, we began drafting the legal documents necessary to bring the matter to court. While the legal process was underway, I decided to take additional action to ensure his behavior didn't go unnoticed. I shared the videos with a few trusted friends and acquaintances, people I knew would understand the gravity of the situation. They were equally appalled and agreed to help spread the word. Soon, the footage was circulating among mutual connections, reaching clients of his clinic and other members of the community. People needed to know the kind of person they were trusting with their pets. Social media became another powerful tool in exposing him. I created a series of posts outlining what I had discovered, accompanied by clips from the videos. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from people who had previously taken their pets to his clinic, expressing their outrage and disgust. Some even shared their own negative experiences, further solidifying the public's understanding of his character. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear that his reputation was irreparably damaged. In the midst of all this, I took steps to protect our Doberman. Knowing that the vet might try to retaliate or manipulate the situation, I decided to remove the dog from harm's way. I drove him to my parents' house, where he would be safe and well cared for. My parents were happy to help, and the Doberman quickly settled in, enjoying the attention and affection he received. Knowing he was out of the vet's reach gave me peace of mind as I continued to pursue justice. As the case progressed, the police became involved. They reviewed the footage I had provided and conducted their own investigation into the clinic. What they uncovered was far worse than I had initially imagined. The abuse I had recorded was just the tip of the iceberg. The vet had been involved in numerous acts of cruelty and malpractice, some of which were too horrific to detail. The evidence against him piled up, and it was clear that he would face severe consequences for his actions. The trial itself was a sobering experience. Witness after witness came forward, sharing their stories and adding to the mountain of evidence. The videos I had recorded played a central role in the prosecution's case, leaving no doubt about his guilt. The courtroom was filled with people who had been affected by his actions, their collective anger and pain palpable. By the time the verdict was delivered, there was no question that justice had been served. The veterinarian was sentenced to 5 years in prison. It wasn't just for the abuse I had documented, but for a long list of other offenses that came to light during the investigation. The sentence brought a sense of closure, not just for me, but for everyone who had suffered because of his actions. It was a small but significant victory in the fight against animal cruelty. Most importantly, the animals in his care were rescued and relocated to safe environments. Knowing that they were now protected and no longer subjected to his abuse was the ultimate reward. While the path to justice had been long and difficult, the outcome made it all worthwhile. The vet had received his punishment, and the animals were finally safe. After her release from the psychiatric facility, my wife wasted no time stirring up chaos. The first thing she did was head straight for my house. I was at work when it started, but my neighbor called to inform me that she had arrived and was breaking windows. By the time I got there, the scene was one of complete destruction. Every window on the ground floor was shattered, and the front door was hanging off its hinges. As if that wasn't enough, I caught sight of her in the driveway, dousing my car with gasoline. I rushed toward her, yelling for her to stop, but it was too late. She struck a match and threw it onto the car. Flames erupted instantly, and I could feel the heat from where I stood. I grabbed my phone and called the fire department while trying to keep her from doing any more damage. She was yelling incoherently, clearly out of control. By the time the firefighters arrived, she had fled the scene, leaving me to deal with the mess she'd created. As I worked with the firefighters to extinguish the flames, I received another devastating call, this time from my mother. She told me that my wife had gone to their house and set their car on fire as well. "She's completely lost her mind," my mother said, her voice shaking. "We're safe, but the car is destroyed." Hearing this only solidified my resolve to ensure she faced the consequences of her actions. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal preparations and damage control. I worked closely with my lawyer, documenting everything: the destruction at my home, the attack on my car, and the arson at my parents' property. The evidence was overwhelming, and the police were already on the hunt for her. I knew that when they caught her, it would be the end of her rampage. It was just a matter of time. Sure enough, the police apprehended her a few days later near my parents' house. She had returned there, perhaps planning to cause more damage, but they were ready for her. My mother called me as soon as it happened. "They've got her," she said, relief evident in her voice. Knowing she was in custody gave me a sense of closure, but there was still more to do to protect myself and my family from further harm. With her behind bars, I focused on finalizing the divorce. My lawyer worked tirelessly to ensure that the process was swift and thorough. We presented the court with the extensive evidence of her destructive behavior, making it clear that she was a danger not only to me but to others as well. The court agreed, granting me full protection and control over our shared assets. One of the most satisfying moments came when the court ruled in my favor regarding the division of property. She was stripped of any claim to our house, our savings, and anything else we had shared. Her actions had consequences, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. The divorce was finalized quickly, and with it came a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. Finally, I decided it was time to start fresh. The house, though now legally mine, carried too many painful memories. I sold it and moved to a new home in a different part of the city, far away from the chaos she had brought into my life. The new house was smaller but felt peaceful and safe. It was exactly what I needed to rebuild and move forward. Looking back, the ordeal had been harrowing, but it was over. She was in prison, where she could no longer hurt anyone, and I had managed to reclaim my life. The road ahead felt promising, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly breathe again.